Hey everybody, so today we are going to be working with the quilted butterfly blocks, and we are going to be doing the left quilted butterfly blocks. You will need to make a grand total of 4 of these. So it doesn't matter if you're watching the quilted butterfly block videos in any particular order, just make sure that you watch all of them. There will be a total of 6 different videos. So be sure that you are checking all of those out to make sure that you are getting all of these. So if you are doing the 4-patch layout, you do not have to do the quilted butterflies. This is only for the people doing the on-point layout with the quilted butterflies. So again, we are doing the left butterflies today. So you are going to need the same color that you have been making all your butterflies with. I'm working with ES392 by Exquisite. And again, I'm also working with Exquisite thread for my quilting. I've used that for all of my quilting through both layouts of the quilt, and that is color number 165. You're also going to need your background fabric cut into half square triangles and whatever kind of batting or stabilizer you're using. If you were using the additional optional wool, if you're doing like me and using the just regular quilt batting, I'm using the either 100% cotton or I'm using a cotton poly blend. So it just depends on what you're doing. I am hooping my hoop with no show mesh stabilizer, and you do have the option to use battleizer. One thing I want to point out before we move any further is because it's really easy to get these mixed up. Just be sure that you're following the numbers that they give you on the instructions. So be sure that when you pull up the design, you are making sure that the design file says this. It's because the right one is eerily similar, but you'll notice that when I rotate it to the same direction, my butterfly would be upside down for the right blocks. So just keep that in mind. So where we're making 4, you are going to need to cut some materials. So let's talk about it. So you are going to start with picking out what size blocks you're making. Are you doing the 5-inch layout or are you doing the 8-inch layout? I am doing the 8-inch layout. So you are going to cut for the top, bottom, left, and right a grand total of 7 squares. Depending on which size you're doing, they have your options. I would recommend, because you're cutting them on the bias, which means from corner to corner, to cut them probably a 1/2 inch to a full inch larger. It just fits better. Here are the instructions for cutting the optional wool. That is how I cut my optional batting that I'm putting in. So I just cut them usually to the same size that they recommend here, but you could also follow this and it would be perfectly fine. So just to note that if you're watching the last video with me, or if you're going back, that you are going to need a lot of butterflies. So let's look at that real quick too. We'll see what all we need of everything. We are going to need 20 square butterflies, 3 bottom butterflies, 3 top butterflies, 4 left butterflies, 4 right butterflies, and 4 just quilted corner pieces. So that's a lot of different blocks. The beautiful thing is they go very quickly, and if you have a larger hoop, I've been showing you guys how you can fit 2 to a hooping for these angled blocks. So let's talk about cutting this on the bias. So if you have your pieces of material that you have cut into a single square, if you were doing the 10 by 10 like I did, I probably cut these more like 11 by 11 or 10.5 by 10.5. But you would have your square, and then see how I've just slid it up through the center, aligning my ruler from one corner to the other. And that's how you're going to cut these into half square triangles. You're going to do that for all of the bottom, the top, the left, and the right blocks. It is different for the corner blocks. You cut those into quarter square triangles, and I go into detail in that in the quilted corner video. So once you've got all your materials, you've got all your blocks together, you're ready to sew. Let's take all of our materials over to the machine. One thing that you need to know is if you were adding your optional back. So if you're adding your optional back, you would have cut that to the same size as your top background. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to start out with my background thread in the needle, which is my ES165. To sew machine stitch step 1. So before we get too deep into this, let's talk about how I fit 2 in a hoop. So as you can see here, I've just allowed some space between the 2 blocks. I pulled one block up, made a copy, and just dragged it down and gave them a bit of space. I am working with a pretty big hoop. I'm on the Brother Avenir, and it has an 18¼ long by 11 5/8 wide hoop. I know if you have the Janome CM17, you can do 2 of these to 1 hooping as well, because it also has a rather large hoop. So just keep that in mind. Also, one thing you can do is you can go, let me hit this. You can go into edit and you can rotate one of your blocks, and you can pull it down and move it around if you need to bring the blocks closer together. So if I wanted, like if I had it turned the opposite direction, I could have rotated it and brought blocks closer together. So just make sure there's no overlaps in your blocks. I'm going to fix this back to where I had it. But just make sure there's no overlaps where the stitching is going to be, and try to give yourself a bit of space. But if your largest hoop is, say, 9.5 by 9.5, rotate them to each other and spread them out as much as you can. So just if you've got a smaller hoop but would still like to do 2 to a hooping, you can do that. Another thing that you can do is a lot of machines have a feature called color sort. Different brands call it different things, but it is where you would do the layout for the butterfly, the embroidery for the butterfly in both blocks, instead of doing all of one then all of the other. The thing about that is, though, is that your number order may be different. So like if it says machine stitch step 1, you're going to do this, machine stitch step 2, you're going to do that. The numbers may change. If that confuses you, I would recommend doing all of one block and then all of the other instead of using color sort. But on the Brother machines, since that's what I'm doing, it's this icon right here. It looks like 3 spools of thread. You would touch that, it would light up, and then it would do all of the quilting on this one, then all of the embroidery and all of the embroidery. So it's going to do it step by step on each block instead of doing all of one then all of the other. So it's just a way to do things. I like to mention why I've got you here. So let's just get ready to sew. So the first thing you're going to do, no matter what you're using, is you're going to sew machine stitch step 1 directly on to either, if you're using battleizer, or if you're doing like me and using no-show mesh, which is very thin and pliable, you're going to go ahead and do that. I have regular embroidery bobbin in the bobbin. I have, again, 165 exquisite thread in my needle. I am working with a 9014 embroidery needle today, but if you were working with the Vanish Light, or if you were doing the optional bobbin changes, it does point that out in your instructions as you go. So let's go ahead and stitch out machine stitch step 1, and that is going to give me where my first block is going to go. So with the next step would actually do a zigzag stitch. That is if you are going to be using the optional wool. It does that zigzag stitch because if you're doing the optional wool and you're using the battleizer, or you're using the batting like I am, it's going to hold it down really well for you. What I normally do is I go back a step after I've laid my batting down, and I repeat machine stitch step 1. But I don't know if I've shown you guys the zigzag stitch yet or not in previous videos, so I want to do that today just so you can see how it is. But if you are not doing the optional wool, you do not have to do machine stitch step 2. So let's go ahead and sew that out. But you may like this better if you're doing the batting like I am, where you're cutting your own piece, because it does do a heavy stitch. That way, if your material's stretched a little on you, because again, we're doing this on the bias, it may catch a little better in your eyes. So who am I to tell you you're wrong? As long as the batting is held down, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But I just wanted to make sure I did at least one video showing you guys what the zigzag stitch looks like. I would also recommend having some embroidery tape. Every time I come to do these videos, I seem to have not brought my embroidery tape with me, and I'm over here risking my fingers. Which do not recommend. 10 for 10 can replace material, cannot replace fingers. So if you are using the trimmer by George ruler, you do not need to trim your batting right now because that ruler helps you trim it. But if you are not going to be using the trimmer by George ruler, I would recommend trimming your batting here if you've got a lot of excess overhang, because it's going to reduce bulk in the seams much later when we go to put our fabric together. Because if you trim this at a quarter or a half inch or whatever you're doing, just again, keep it consistent. If at all possible, keep it consistent. I like quarter inch. I have a coworker who likes half. It's okay. Just try to keep it consistent. But it reduces the bulk now, so you don't have to worry about it later. But I've said it before, I will do a video on how to use the trimmer by George ruler. All right, so once you have your batting down, your optional wool, or like I have my just cotton poly blend batting down, then you're going to take your one single piece of fabric and you are going to lay it on top of your batting piece, and you are going to cover all the stitches. Now, if you were working with battleizer, skip 2 entirely if you are not adding the optional wool or additional batting, because you do not need that step at all. So I just want to point that out. So now we are going to tack down our fabric. So let's go ahead and get that handled. Now you do have the option at this point to, you could have taken the hoop off the machine and you could have put the optional Vanish Light bobbin in, which is a wash away thread. So this stitch would come out for you. I'm working on this over a prolonged period of time. I do not want that stitch to come out. I know she does it so that you won't see those stitches if you accidentally miss up on your seam a little bit, so that won't be showing, so you may want to do that. So that is entirely at your discretion. So once we have got this tack down, we're going to move straight on to the next step, which is machine stitch step 4, and it is going to do all of our quilting just like it did in the quilted butterfly block right. But again, we're doing the quilted butterfly left. So I've got 2 loaded in my machine to do just so I can conserve my stabilizer and time, and it's telling me that it's going to take 18 minutes. I'm going to divide that in half. So at the speed that my machine is setting, it's going to take me about 9 minutes for all the stitching out. That doesn't count my trim downs or my placements or anything, or my thread changes. And it's telling me that I have 11,508 stitches. So I'm going to just mathematical that, and just half of that will be your stitches. So you're looking at about 5,700-800 stitches per hooping. It's going to be a grand total of 5 steps per block. So not a ton of work going into these. They go very, very quickly, which is nice, especially since we're going to be doing quite a few of them. But I've loved the quilted feathers that they put into this since the beginning. It's wonderful. So one thing to point out, since we're working on the quilting right now, is that if you were adding the additional backing, what we would have done is we would have slid the hoop off the machine, we would have flipped the hoop over to the back, we would have taken a piece of fabric cut to the same size as our top piece, and we would have covered all the stitching excuse me, and we would have taped it down well to secure it in place before we started our quilting. We would have also changed our bobbin to the same color as whatever our back material was, so they could match. Now, another thing to mention is that when you go to do the quilted butterfly, it is the last step. So here's the thing. She tells you to go ahead and keep that bobbin in so it'll match your back color whenever you switch it. I don't know if I would necessarily like the butterfly quilted into the back of it, since it's such a heavy stitch on a lot of it, if it was just the outline of the wings. So what you could do is skip forward to step 5, and you could stitch out the butterfly before you stitch out the quilting, and just leave your regular bobbin in there since it wouldn't be seen through, and then go back and then add your backing, and then go back and do step 4 and quilt. That is up to you, but the pattern instructions are very clearly laid out. She does talk about it. I'm not discrediting the way she does things by any means. She's the pattern manufacturer. She knows what's best. I'm just giving suggestions because I teach a lot of embroidery classes and a lot of sewing classes. So I just like to talk about, you know, optional flexibilities that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and change my thread here. I'm going to switch to purple. I am adding my back after I make all my blocks, and then I'm going to put them together, and then in between them I'm going to just do a stitch. I've not decided if I'm going to do a serpentine or a stitch in the ditch yet. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, and we'll do a video about that when we get there. But I just kind of wanted to point out, like, I am adding my back after the fact. That's just the way I like to do things. Now we're going to hit start, and we're going to sew out our last step, which is our butterfly block. One thing to point out is that it always, from everything I've seen, is it always stitches out the run stitch, which is just like this forward backward stitch right here, to do the butterfly wings first and foremost. Then it will do the little satin stitch for the little bulbs on the antenna of the butterfly. And then it will do the body. Oh, I must have not checked my bobbin. I need to change my bobbin real quick. I'm so sorry about that. I'm usually better about checking that. I guess I didn't. So let's change our bobbin real fast. Long hoop. Alrighty. I was smart enough to have about 5 bobbins wound though before I started today. So that is one thing that I have done correctly. So we'll count our wins. So let me slide that back on there. Now, this isn't a necessity, but this is one thing I do. I'm going to go back about 10 stitches. Whenever I have a thread break like that, I want to make sure my stitching catches. So I just go back about 5 or 10 stitches and just go right on. And it picked up just fine, so we'll count that as a win. But again, it's going to do all the wings first, then the little satin stitch on the head of the antenna of the butterfly, and then it will do that beautiful cross weave stitch that it does for the body of the butterfly. And I absolutely love that stitch. I think it adds something extra to this. So it is very clearly laid out in your instructions how she talks about switching your optional bobbins and adding your optional back. But I always like to talk about this. So for the quilted butterfly block that we are currently on, they're all going to follow a similar path, even though you only really get the full instructions for the square butterfly, but they all follow a similar method. The only thing is in the corners you don't have a butterfly to put in. But she talks about in step 5, if you're doing the optional back, place thread that contrasts in fabric 1, meaning to put the butterfly color in your needle, and bobbin if backing fabric has been added. So basically put in the color that you want to match your back, and it will quilt the butterfly. And it would add a beautiful quilting design. I just want to throw the fact that you can skip forward and backward steps out there, because I know that there is going to be someone who doesn't like that, and I just want to give you your options. So just change your threads as you go. And she always talks about bringing your bobbin thread to the top before you start doing these quilting steps and these butterfly steps if you're doing the optional back and the additional optional bobbin, just to prevent threadness, which I think is a great tip. So I would recommend that you do that as well, bringing your bobbin thread up before you begin sewing. If you're doing the optional back where you're not working with bobbin thread, you're working with a heavier weight thread more than likely. That is not a 60 weight embroidery bobbin thread. Will make a lot of difference a lot of times. So I would highly recommend doing what she says there and bringing your bobbin thread up to the top. Oh great, it's already started stitching out the antenna, so that's going to go pretty quickly too. And then the last thing you're going to have to worry about is getting the body stitched out, but I promise we are almost to the end. But these are just gorgeous. I don't know who at Hoop Sister designed these, but man, they did a fabulous job. Now, one thing I want to point out is that if you do skip forward and do the butterfly before you go and do the quilting, it will overlap some of your butterfly, especially right in here a little bit. So you may not want to do that, but I just like to point things out. Just food for thought for y'all. Choose what you can live with. Like, that's where I stand on a lot of this. Oh, I love the cross stitch. So if this is your first video, I always like to show off the cross weave stitch. So I absolutely love the cross weave stitch that it does inside this butterfly body. It just adds a little depth of texture to it. So, oh my gosh, beautiful job, Hoop Sisters. You guys designed this quilt layout absolutely beautifully. So again, just before we end, no matter which order you're watching the butterfly videos in, that's totally fine. But I do want to point out, since this is the last one that I'm making, you are going to need a grand total of 20 of the square butterfly blocks. You're going to need 3 of the bottom butterfly blocks, 3 of the top butterfly blocks, 4 of the left butterfly blocks, 4 of the right butterfly blocks, and 4 of the quilted corners. So just keep that in mind. You will be making quite a few of these. And again, guys, just be sure you are watching which size you are stitching out, because you do have a 5-inch and an 8-inch option. And then that will also change the finished size of your quilt. So, you know, make your choices before we get diving deep into it. But we are almost done with our butterfly, and she is looking gorgeous. Perfect. So it ended up being 5,754 stitches. I do want to point that out. So we have finished our butterfly. So now all you would do after you have finished this butterfly, whatever method you're using, go ahead and repeat that 3 more times to have your total of 4 of the left quilted butterfly blocks. Be sure that you have made all of your butterfly blocks if you were doing the on point layout. And again, if you are doing the 4-patch layout, you do not have to make any of these butterfly blocks. You will just be making 4 of each block. All right, guys, I appreciate it. I hope you are enjoying this series, and I hope you guys have a great time stitching out all of your beautiful butterfly blocks. Until next time, happy sewing. Bye-bye.